I'm Ben Meiselas from the MeidasTouch network. We are digging through some of the depositions that the January 6th committee is releasing to the public. We previously did a video on the depositions where all of these right-wing MAGA extremists, usually those who are the loudest on the right-wing media extremist echo chamber, when they were confronted in deposition, they were the first to go, I plead the fifth, I plead the fifth, I plead the fifth. Now, let's talk about one of the most heroic witnesses who was before the January 6th committee, Cassidy Hutchinson. She had been deposed about 4 times before the January 6th committee before she ultimately testified at the public hearing that you all will recall on June 28th of 2022 and did an incredible job. We have her deposition transcripts now since the January 6th committee has released 2 of those deposition transcripts. And what we see here are the efforts by Trump-controlled lawyers to try to manipulate her during her prior depositions to tell falsehoods, and she recounts those in her later depositions after she got a new attorney, and she was able to tell the January 6th committee specifically what took place. And I want to read for you those depositions when she hired the new lawyer. Remember, she was previously represented by Stefan Pasentino. Stefan Pasentino started a law firm called Elections LLC, which was paid a lot of money, nearly $500,000 that we know of, by the Save America PAC, Donald Trump's organization, really a criminal enterprise that is now under criminal investigation by the Department of Justice for grifting and lying to cult members to try to get their donations and then to do things with the donations that were actually not legitimate and not what they told the donors, to use those donations to try to obstruct the transfer of power, to obstruct a peaceful transition, to obstruct the ability of President Biden to assume the presidency. But let's dig into some of these depositions. So this is from the deposition of Cassidy Hutchinson. And in this deposition, she talks about, and this deposition is from September. And this is what she talks about, some of the conduct engaged in by Stefan Pasentino. Here's what she says. She goes, referring to Pasentino, he goes, no, no, no. He said, look, we want to get you in and get you out. We're going to downplay your role, Cassidy. You were a secretary. You had an administrative role. Everyone's on the same page about this. It's extremely unfair. They're being the committee, that the committee is putting you in this position in the first place. You really have nothing to do with any of this. It's Mark Meadows' fault that you're ever involved in this. We're completely happy to keep taking care of you now. We had no idea you weren't being taken care of at all last year, so we're really happy that you reached back out to us. But the less you remember, Cassidy, the better. I don't think you should be filling any calendars or anything. And of course, perhaps I should have mentioned it at the outset, but I know you as MeidasTouch network viewers know Cassidy Hutchinson's role, but she was the top aide to Mark Meadows. She was literally right there in the Oval and saw how Donald Trump acted and those in his inner circle acted, and that's what made her June 8th, 2020 testimony so compelling, that she had these firsthand observations of a lot of this unlawful conduct. And of course, her boss, Mark Meadows, is a complete and utter traitor and coward, and filed a lawsuit against the January 6th committee because he was too scared to testify in front of the January 6th committee, and he tried to obstruct his own testimony. We go on to Cassidy Hutchinson's testimony, and as part of this testimony, you see more of Stefan Pasentino, her lawyer, telling her, just don't tell the committee this. You don't need to remember any of this. Especially, you don't need to remember anything about what Tony Ornato may have told you about what the Secret Secret Service said Donald Trump did to them in the SUV, where he tried to attack the Secret Service to make them go to the Capitol building so he could himself storm the Capitol with the insurrectionists. Pull up the deposition right here. And this is the testimony from Cassidy Hutchinson. She goes, I told Stefan that day about the incident that happened in the Beast, which I should refer to it as the presidential limo because that was one. And I remember saying to Stefan, quote, Tony Ornato and I were very close at the White House. Tony told me this incident happened. And I didn't go into extremely graphic details with Stefan about it. I tried to kind of make it more casual than my conversation with Tony really was. But I think I said something to Stefan like, yeah, I had this conversation with Tony Ornato when we got back from the rally that day, and he told me that the president tried to wrap his hands around Bobby's neck and strangle him because he wouldn't take him to the Capitol. And then Stefan, Cassidy's lawyer, said, no. And Cassidy goes, I remember he like sat back in his chair and he's like, no. We don't want to go there with the January 6th committee. We don't want to talk about that with the January 6th committee. This is a lawyer, Stephen Passantino, being paid by Donald Trump's organization, telling the star witness before the January 6th committee, no, we don't want to go there before the January 6th committee. We also see testimony from Cassidy Hutchinson where she's telling the January 6th committee that when Passantino was her lawyer, because Passantino had told her in these earlier depositions back in March, before she testified over the summer, for example, to just say you don't recall, she felt so uncomfortable in these depositions. She felt like she was lying to the January 6th committee in these depositions. And Cassidy Hutchinson really opened up to the January 6th committee later after she had a true independent lawyer, and she explained what took place. And she explained how when she was saying these things, like during a break, Stephen Passantino would say, like she said, she turned to Passantino and she said, Stephen, I'm fucked. And he was like, don't freak out. You're fine. And I said, no, Stephen, I'm fucked. I just lied to the January 6th committee. And he said, you didn't lie. And I said, no, Stephen, do you know how many times they just asked me that question? I just lied. And Stephen said, they don't know what you know, Cassidy. They don't know that you can recall some of these things. So you just saying, I don't recall, is definitely an acceptable response, is an entirely acceptable response to this, Cassidy. He's like, they're prodding, Cassidy. They want there to be something. They don't know that there is something. And we're not going to give them anything because this is not important, Cassidy. You are doing great. You are doing fine. You are doing exactly what you should be doing, Cassidy. That's what Stephen Passantino, who again is being paid by the Trump Save America group for his law firm, who's also representing Cassidy, this is what he is telling her, which is, in my opinion, highly unethical, disturbing, and essentially telling her not to tell the truth to the January 6th committee. She goes on to say, but this one, there's no way out. And that's why I was so explicit with Stefan. I was like, I lied. And Stefan said, no, you're fine. You're fine. So then we went back into the interview, and that sort of had me rattled for a little bit. And yeah, I'd say to him like, they know a lot. The January 6th committee knows a lot, Stefan. And he'd say back to me, quote, they don't know you know a lot. You think they know because you do know a lot. But you're doing the right thing here, Cassidy. You're doing the right thing. That's what Cassidy says Stephen Passantino told her. One of the other things that she told the committee in September, she said that Ben Williamson, who worked for Mark Meadows, gave her a call before her deposition testimony. And Ben Williamson said to her, she goes, and he said something to the effect of, quote, well, Mark Meadows wants me to let you know that he knows you're loyal and he knows you'll do the right thing tomorrow and that you're going to protect him and you're going to protect the boss. You know, he knows that we're all on the same team, Cassidy. We're all family, Cassidy. Do well and let me know how it goes. That's what Mark Meadows' deputy said to Cassidy Hutchinson before she gave one of her deposition testimonies. One of the other things that Hutchinson said is ultimately it was a GOP member of Congress who's actually not a member of the select committee who basically told her, you're going to have to take the mirror test. You're going to have to look yourself in the mirror and do the right thing. What's so interesting about that, in my view, is that I think there are some other Republican members who maybe are not on the committee who knew. I mean, increasingly, the Republican Party is kind of purely the MAGA Republican extremist party. But because people like this who knew that Donald Trump was doing completely the most damaging thing to our country, that Donald Trump was an absolute traitor, but had these private conversations and were not public, the same way Liz Cheney and the same way Adam Kinzinger was. But nonetheless, it was this Republican member of Congress who had spoken to Cassidy and said, look, you can't be doing this with Trump world if you want to tell the truth. And you're going to have to look in the mirror and you're going to have to ask yourself, what is your legacy and what do you want to do? And Cassidy Hutchinson said she ultimately started reading history, and specifically the history as it relates to Nixon and those who spoke out and those who didn't speak out. And ultimately that was persuasive for her as well to follow her conscience and then ultimately speak before Congress at the public hearing on June 28, 2022 and tell the truth. I thought one of the other really bombshell parts of this was from the testimony that we now have that the January 6th committee released as well, is John Ratcliffe, who is the National Intelligence Director under the Trump administration. He was appointed in 2020 to become the National Intelligence Director of National Intelligence. He was by the Oval Office with Cassidy Hutchinson, and he had pulled her aside, and he said, I think Mark Meadows has given Donald Trump some really bad advice here. Trump had told me, is what Ratcliffe said, that he knew he lost the election, but then he would spiral back into, even though Trump knew he lost the election, that he said, well, we got to overturn the results. And let me read for you specifically what Cassidy said about John Ratcliffe. She said, and she's doing that, John and I are standing out in Meadows' office area, and Mr. Ratcliffe has a way of diplomatically approaching things, but I also can kind of understand where he is getting at with this, because he delicately asked me, he's like, Cass, have you heard any of the advice lately that Mark's been giving to the president? And I said, quote, I hear a lot of things and I see a lot of things, John. What are you referring to? Because I just didn't want to assume what he was asking. And so Ratcliffe goes to me. He said, quote, well, I'm kind of a little worried about what's going on around here. He's like, I've had a few conversations with the president, Trump, where he acknowledged he's lost. He hasn't acknowledged that he wants to concede, but he acknowledges that he lost the election. But then he'll immediately backpedal, or he'll immediately call the next day and say that he didn't lose the election and I should call Mark and that Mark has more information. He said to me, I'm just worried, Cassidy, that Mark's not giving him good advice. But to me, this is such a bombshell, because here you have Cassidy Hutchinson saying that she spoke again with John Ratcliffe, the director of national intelligence, who saying that Trump told him that he lost and he was aware that he lost. So certainly John Ratcliffe is going to be on the short list of people that special counsel Jack Smith is going to be calling in a future indictment of Trump. And And also, one of the things that we see as well in this testimony is Cassidy Hutchinson's communications with Mark Meadows. And she's saying that she had lots of communications with Meadows leading up to the insurrection and following the November 2020 election. This is what Cassidy Hutchinson said here. Question. Okay. Any other times when you recall hearing statements about the president or from the president about his loss? Answer. I can't pin down the date of this one, but it was between Saturday, June 2nd and Saturday, January 2nd and Tuesday, January 5th. And the source was Kevin McCarthy. Question. Tell us about it. Answer. And the only reason I can't pin down the specific date is because in this period, Kevin and I spoke frequently, if not daily. So Kevin called me and we were just talking about various things and sort of similar to the conversation I had with Ratcliffe earlier in December. Mr. McCarthy asked me, it was a little bit more blunt. Mr. McCarthy asked me something like, what's Mark doing? What's Mark thinking? He's giving the president bad advice. I said, well, what do you mean, Kevin? Kevin said, I talk to the president sometimes and he admits he lost the election, but then he'll immediately say he didn't lose and there's actually a way that he's going to stay in office. And he's like, I can only imagine that's coming from Mark. Mark's lying to him, Cassidy. There's no way that he can actually think he won the election, right? Like he knows it's over. And I said, look, I don't know. I was like, I hear a lot of conflicting things. And he said, well, Mark needs to give him better advice. And I said, okay, I'll let Mark know that you think he should give better advice. And just think about for a second, though, how cowardly Kevin McCarthy is right now, that Kevin McCarthy is out there acting like he never said these things, and Kevin McCarthy's refusing to speak to the January 6th committee. Kevin McCarthy, the ultimate, not just dereliction of duty, but aiding and abetting an insurrection, aiding and abetting the overthrow of our democracy. And notice how Kevin McCarthy's statements seem identical to John Ratcliffe's statements, because that is indeed what Donald Trump was telling people at the time, admitting that he lost, but then going into this, I don't care that I lost. I'm still going to win. Even if I lost, I'm going to overthrow American democracy. And that's why they're saying, look, Mark Meadows is not doing his job, but also you had the most traitorous person in the presidency who wanted to overthrow our democracy. So a number of bombshells in that deposition testimony. We're going to comb through some of the other deposition testimony as well. Want to give a shout out as well here to Kyle Cheney, spelled Kylecheny. Kyle Cheney writes for Politico. He did a great tweet thread which helped organize a lot of those transcripts, which played a major part in how I was able to go through it in such an organized way. Kyle Cheney does great work, and I would tell everybody to make sure you follow him and read his articles on Politico. But he did a great job going through the depositions as well and making a tweet thread that certainly helped with this reporting. I'm Ben Meiselas from the MeidasTouch Network. Hit the subscribe button. We're on our way to 1 million subscribers thanks to your support. And in addition to hitting the subscribe button here, check us out at patreon.com/MeidasTouch, patreon.com/MeidasTouch. We have lots of exclusive content you can only get on our Patreon site, but most importantly, help grow this independent media platform by going to Patreon. I think you'll really like the exclusive content, and let's help grow this thing together. I'm Ben Meiselas from the MeidasTouch Network. Until next time.
MeidasTouch is unapologetically pro-democracy. And look, we know you are too. So please make sure you check out our best-selling shirt and our best-selling gear, the unapologetically pro-democracy gear. And hey, while you're at it, make sure you check out my favorite shirt and one of our most famous designs, It Wasn't Rigged, You're Just a Loser, at store.meidastouch.com. That's store.meidastouch.com.